Because most manufacturers are producing just one electric vehicle, the Kia Soul has a very different competitive set than it does in the gasoline counterpart. This competes with everything from the Chevy Spark EV and the Fiat 500e to something along the lines of a Volkswagen Golf, the Nissan Leaf, or possibly even a BMW i3. The front end of the Soul looks very much like the gasoline version, except we get this blanked out grille right up front because EVs require less cooling than their gasoline counterparts. You'll notice that we still have a radiator right here below this portion of the front grille. The blanked out portion of the grille is not completely useless. It does house the charging connectors for this vehicle. We have a standard J1772 AC power connector, and we have a CHAdeMO DC fast charge connector that is standard on the Soul. You'll notice that in many of the other EVs out there, the fast charging connector is optional. Now, the version of the Soul we're taking a look at is the top end plus trim, which means we do get these optional fog lights and we have the optional front parking sensors. HID headlamps are not available in the Kia Soul EV, although they are available in the gasoline Soul. So all the EV versions get these headlamps right here, which have halogen beams inside, and the LED daytime running lamp strips. Behind this little orange door is where you'll find the level 1 and level 2 charging connector. This is an AC charging connector. If you charge this vehicle with the 120 volt cord that comes with the car, it'll take about 27 hours to charge it from zero. On the AC 240 volt charging cable, that will take about 4 hours. If you use this DC CHAdeMO charging connector here with these much bigger pins, you can go from 0 to 80% battery capacity in about 30 minutes. Being inside the Soul, it's a little deceptive about how small this vehicle really is. This is significantly smaller than something like a Honda Civic or a Toyota Corolla. At 163 inches long, this is actually even shorter than a Volkswagen e-Golf. This also comes in approximately 1 foot shorter than a Nissan Leaf or a Ford Focus hatchback, and it's a little bit longer than a Fiat 500e. Now, the reason the Soul seems bigger than it is all right back here, because we get this very square rear end. Makes it very practical for cargo hauling, and it also means that the rear passengers get a considerable amount of headroom. You'll notice that even though the window line drops towards the rear, the roof line doesn't drop at all towards the rear. It stays very square all the way to the back. Kia limits the color palette on the EVs to just a few different schemes, including the blue and white two-tone scheme that our model gets, but all the EV models get this very unique EV wheel. The reason they do this in EVs in general, that is having these smaller holes you'll see right here, is because it's more efficient to get less wind resistance on this kind of a wheel. We also have slightly narrower tires and low rolling resistance rubber because, of course, efficiency is king in this kind of vehicle. The overall square theme of the Soul continues out back. You can see that we get these very flat sides that also helps improve rear passenger headroom because the side of your head's not bumping on the side of the vehicle. We have this very vertical hatch back here. Again, our model has these optional rear parking sensors, backup camera right here in the middle. Fiat's 500e is definitely cute, but I think the Soul is probably the most attractive EV in my mind currently available. I think this actually ties with something along the lines of a BMW i3, but in a very different sort of way. This is very mainstream car looking. The i3 is very concept car looking. Any way you slice it, this is definitely an awful lot more conventional looking than something like a Nissan Leaf. Logically, under the hood is where we find the electric motor, but we also find more than that. We also find all the electronics that really make this car go. This electric motor is good for 109 horsepower and 210 pound-feet of torque, which is a little bit lower than you'll see in the regular gasoline Kia Soul. As a result, this is a little bit slower 0 to 60, as we'll discuss in the drive section. Power is sent to the front wheels only via a single-speed automatic transmission. Powering that electric motor is a very large 27 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery. This is one of the largest batteries you can find in a non-Tesla vehicle in the US. For those that are counting, this battery is about 33% larger in terms of its capacity than BMW's i3 electric. The battery is positioned low in the vehicle. It's actually right down here, approximately in this black section of the lower trim. What allowed Kia to do this is the very square proportions of the Soul and the fact that it was a front-wheel drive-based vehicle, so there wasn't really anything running to the back. That allowed them to place that very large battery pack completely under the vehicle. Obviously, the Soul is very square, so this is not the most aerodynamic vehicle available, but this still scores 105 mpge in the EPA cycle. Now, the mpge thing is really stupid, but it is really a way to compare one EV to another. You'll notice that the BMW i3, with its very skinny tires, its very different kind of profile, and lightweight construction, gets well over 105 mpge. But this is considerably more efficient than something like a Tesla. In terms of real-world efficiency, I much prefer miles per kilowatt hour, and this ranges between 4 and 4.1 miles per kilowatt hour, a little bit less efficient than Volkswagen's e-Golf. An important consideration with any EV is the charging ability of the vehicle, because the charger is built into the vehicle. It's not that thing that you plug the car into. That thing you plug the car into is an EVSE or an electric vehicle supply equipment. The charger is actually built right into the car itself. The Soul EV uses a 6.6 kilowatt charger, which is about the same speed as the top end versions of the Nissan Leaf or the Fiat 500e, but it is slower than the Volkswagen e-Golf or the Mercedes B-Class electric or the BMW i3, which do use 7 or 10 kilowatt chargers. Front seat comfort comes in at 8 out of 10 points. We still get the tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion that we get in the regular gasoline Soul, but we don't get the power driver's seat that we get in the upper level trims of that gas model. That's all about saving weight. Unfortunately, we also lose the adjustable lumbar support in this seat that you do get in those higher level trims of the Soul. In general, the 6-way adjustable manual seat is very comfortable, but you will be more comfortable, especially if you need more lower back support in the gasoline version of this vehicle. Rear seat comfort comes in at 9 out of 10 points. Keep in mind that the Soul is not as wide as the Leaf, but it is very tall, so we have an exceptional amount of headroom in the back. Sitting upright in this back seat, I have about 2.5 inches of headroom left. Sitting right here behind myself, I also have about 3 inches of legroom. If I scoot all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, where I had a 6'5" passenger in the front seat, I still have about 1.5 inches of legroom, and again, 2 inches of headroom. Even though I say the Soul is not a terribly wide vehicle, it is wider than something like a Ford Fiesta, with which this also competes in gasoline form, because the Soul starts very inexpensively in the gasoline versions. In this center seat, however, I have an awful lot more room than your average subcompact hatch. Again, I have about 2 inches of headroom, even though this is a little bit higher than these outboard seating positions. While the gasoline Soul can be had with a panoramic sunroof that does cut down on rear headroom, the Soul EV is not available with that, so you don't have that particular worry. In the EV version, the rear seats still fold flat with the cargo area in the back in a 60-40 folding fashion. One nice touch is that the center seat belt is truly in the seat. It doesn't come out of the ceiling, and that does mean that installing child seats and fitting people in the back is a lot easier. If you fold the seat forward, you don't have that seat belt dangling out of the ceiling to worry about. When the Soul is converted into an EV, it surprisingly doesn't lose much cargo carrying capacity. Cargo figures come in at 18.8 cubic feet, which is a little bit smaller than the Nissan Leaf, but I actually think that this cargo area is a little bit more practically shaped than you'll find in the Leaf. Here's the thing about the cargo area. This is a 24-inch roller bag. This is the biggest bag you can take on a domestic flight, and with the load floor in place, you can see I can't really stick it in this position and still close the hatch. I can barely stick one of them in the back. If I put it right there in the middle, then I can actually close the hatch if I'm really careful. What's surprising about this, however, is how deep this cargo area actually is. The load floor is in place, so that way when you fold the rear seats forward, it's completely flat with the back. But if I actually take this load floor out of the vehicle, right like that, then you notice I have a very deep cargo well. This is the same as you get in the gasoline version of this vehicle. If I drop this 24-inch roller bag right there in that cargo well, I can actually place it below the tonneau cover. We have this foam divider tray right here in the bottom, very much like we do in the gasoline version. But if we remove this from the vehicle, we don't find a spare tire in the back. Instead, we find the blower that cools the battery, and we find a little tray with our tire inflator and the can of Fix-A-Flat. If you're wondering what to do with the load floor, it does self-store in that position right back there at the back of the cargo area. That is enough out of the way to put, again, roller bags in that area of the trunk. When it comes to my trunk comfort index, the Kia Soul EV scores 9 out of 10 points. That's largely because my TCI is more about cargo practicality than overt cargo space, because this gets about 3 cubic feet less storage space than Volkswagen's e-Golf, but I found it much more practical and much easier to use because of the way you can jam cargo in the back. It's all about the shape and the depth right here under the load floor. We also get a handle right here to help you close this cargo area, which is a lot easier than some of those other vehicles out there. And one feature that's unique to Kia and Hyundai vehicles is that we still have an escape hatch right there, so that way if you do close the trunk on yourself, you can still get out. Up front, we have height adjustable seat belts for both the driver and the front passenger, and we have two-way adjustable headrests in all models. Keep in mind we are in the up-level Plus trim, which means that we do get leather seats. The base model uses biofabrics instead. To help distinguish the EV model from the rest of the Souls, we have a blue trim running right down here across the leather, and you notice this is perforated leather because these are cooled seats in the Plus trim. When taking a look at the Soul on dealer lots, it's important to keep in mind that there are essentially two interiors in the Soul. There's a base one that you find in the lower-end gasoline models, and then there's an upper-level one that we find in the Plus, Exclaim, as well as this EV Plus model. model. It's most notable because we have a lot more soft touch plastics on the door panels. This is all soft touch plastic right up here. We get a soft touch insert right there in the middle and a small soft touch armrest. The EV model gets this white plastic trim for the door handle, and then we get more soft touch plastics in this insert. The upgraded plastics continue as we move over to the dashboard. This is all a soft touch injection molded upper dashboard, and we have a large glove box right in here. It's more of a slot type glove box, so you lower this door and then you can fit quite large items inside. That's also where you'll find the air filter for the cabin air filtration system. Like the gasoline model, the Soul is all about style. You can see that we have these very stylized speaker grills right there up top. If we look lower down in the door, you'll also find another speaker right down there at the bottom of the door. You should note that the EV models, in order to save weight, do not have the up-level sound system option available, so we don't get the lighted speaker grills that you'll find in the Gasoline, Exclaim, and Plus trims. The other thing missing from the EV model is the center channel speaker that you do get in the upper level trims of the Gasoline model. Instead, we get a blank, and then we get this charge status indicator array. These tell you how charged your battery is in thirds, so right now it's charging the last third of the battery. Working our way down from the dashboard, we have those two large air vents and a hazard light indicator. We also have this large 8-inch touchscreen infotainment and navigation system standard on every Soul EV model. If you recall my review of the Volkswagen e-Golf, I complained that its infotainment and navigation system really lacked the EV-specific features we've come to expect in modern electric vehicles. That's not going on in this system. If you want to know more about the system in general, go ahead and click that banner at the bottom of your screen. There's a separate video on just the infotainment system. But in this video, we're going to go over the EV features. If we hit that EV button, we get this EV screen right here. We have range, nearby stations, and energy information. We can click on these options and get some additional information. For instance, clicking on that range gives you your safe ring and your, if you really pushed it, ring of distance right there. So you can see that our battery's not quite full, but it thinks we could go 70 miles safely, 87 miles if we were really careful. And there are 475 charging stations in that area. If I go back, we have those nearby charging stations and we can actually scroll through them. The system does support scrolling with your finger like that. We can go back as well. See our energy information. Our battery is 77% charged. It says that on the 120 volt cable that we are connected to right now, it will take an additional 6 hours, 20 minutes to finish charging. Of course, if we had a 240 volt charger that you would normally have if you bought one of these at home, it'd probably take about 30 minutes to finish this. Over here on electric use, you can see where exactly our electricity is going. Right now, the climate control system is on, we're not moving, and all the other electronics in the vehicle are using 0.28 kilowatts all by themselves. If I were to, for instance, turn on the headlamps and then turn on the high beam, you can see this number will go up right there. If I were to also turn on the heated steering wheel and a heated seat or two, you'll see that number continues to climb. A nice touch that we've seen in other EVs is that it will tell you what your range is, as well as what your range would be if you turned the climate control off. You can see that we're not very different right now because we're not using a whole lot of power in the climate control system. If, however, we crank this climate control up to heat the cabin, for instance, we put it all the way on 90, you'll actually see this number climb quite drastically because it takes an awful lot of energy to heat a cabin. We're, of course, sitting in this car in 70-degree weather, so I'm going to go ahead and drop this down to cooling. We can, of course, click back over to the battery information screen at any time, or click all the way back to this home screen. Eco driving tells you how ecologically you're driving, gives you a little graph right here, a little tree. Right now we're at eco level 4, or average energy consumption right down there. And if we click on the history, this will tell you your most recent trips. Now, rather unfortunately, this takes a little bit of getting used to, but on this history screen, it does not show you the average economy on that trip. I know that for sure because this 11.5 miles right here was spent climbing a hill from sea level up to 800 feet where I live. That took 11.5 miles, and I most certainly did not average 4.2 miles per kilowatt hour. That 4.2 kilowatts is the running average of this vehicle when that trip ended. And that's why they're all above 4 right there, because my average has been running between 4.1 and 4.4 miles per kilowatt hour. Via this screen, we can also set the charging times. You would want to use this if your utility has peak rates and off-peak rates. So for instance, my utility starts charging me more before 6 p.m. So from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., you don't really want to charge your EV in my area. So I've set this to charge after 6 p.m. You turn it on and off. You can set your days of week there, etc. You can also set whether you want the battery to go to 80% or 100%. If you always charge your battery to 80%, then your battery will actually last longer. So if that's an option for you, you can do it right here in this scheduling screen. You can also tell the car when you want to turn your climate control on. So if you live in a cold area, you can have the car preheat the cabin for you. That's going to be more efficient because it's going to use the power from your mains connector. It's not going to use the battery. It's will actually just use the charging station you're connected to. turn it on and off, and do the same sort of settings right there as well. Over on EV settings, we have some additional settings specific to this EV again. Battery warning level, frequency of that warning, so once you drop below a specific level, it can annoy you every so many minutes. Heating the seat is more efficient than heating the cabin, and heated seats are standard in the Soul EV. All models do use a heat pump right across here. These are the controls for that automatic heat pump system, but still heating the cabin is going to be less efficient via this system than just heating the seat or the steering wheel. In the upper level trims, we also get cooled seats, which is another nice option because again, it's a lot cheaper energy consumption wise to cool the seat rather than cool the cabin. Another energy saving feature is this driver only button. If we click that button, then air stops coming out the other vents in the vehicle, only focuses on the driver. That helps reduce energy consumption as well. This is the button to enable or disable the climate timer settings. We don't have anything enabled right now, that's why it flashed. Below those controls on the dashboard, we have our 12-volt power outlets, one on the left that's 120 watts and one on the right that's 180 watts over there. We also have our auxiliary input and our USB input. I do have an iPhone 6 connected to it, and as you can see, I do not need that funky Kia splitter cable that they once required you to use. It does work just fine with the Apple Lightning connector. Below the auxiliary inputs, we have a small storage area. We also have the power button because the Soul EV does come with keyless go and keyless entry. That's what the remote looks like. We have a very traditional shifter right here, drive all the way down, and then B is for increased regenerative braking. Behind the shifter, we have an electric parking brake, our parking sensor enable and disable button for both the front and the rear parking sensors, active eco button, small storage cubby right there, two very large cup holders with a slider cover. And then if we move behind that, we have this very large center console. We can jam in all sorts of stuff in there. We have a video camera, we can throw in some batteries, some glasses cases. I was able to put a still camera in there as well, some more glasses, a wallet, and then still close that. Over on the driver's side, we have an entirely different instrument cluster from the gasoline version of the Soul. Over on the left, we have our power and battery gauge. If we were charging the battery via regenerative braking, it would light up blue on the bottom side of this section over on the right. If we were in the eco zone for this motor, it would be over here in the green. If we were flooring it, it would be all the way up here at the top. This is the battery gauge to the right of that. It's not quite a direct relationship to the battery charge, I noticed. So it does seem to drop rather rapidly at the beginning, and then half seems to be a little bit further than half down there to give you a little bit more warning, a little bit more prodding that you may need to charge your battery. On the right side, we have our digital speedometer. We actually have a number right in the middle, and then it actually will light up across this side as you get towards the top end speed limit of the Soul EV. Speed limit is right around 90 miles in this vehicle. It won't let you go any faster than that. In the center of all that, we have a small multifunction LCD. The LCD is controlled via these two buttons on the steering wheel. This changes the pages you're on, and this scrolls through options on the page. Via this screen, we can change a wide variety of different vehicle settings. We can also see our charge remaining time if we're plugged in, energy flow, energy consumption average right there, 4.2. We have our trip computer information. We have a small infotainment readout. Doesn't give you a whole lot of information on iPods or other connected media devices. If you're plugged in like we are, it will show you the remaining charge time. And then we can scroll over to our service reminders. Moving out to the steering wheel, we have essentially the same leather-wrapped steering wheel we find in the top-end trims of the Soul. You'll find your radio controls over here, volume up, down, track up, down as well, mode button, voice command button, and dedicated phone hang-up and pick-up buttons. On this side of the steering wheel, we have our cruise control buttons, those two buttons I showed you earlier for controlling that multi-information display. And this button right down here allows you to change the steering effort in the Soul. You can select from 3 different levels of steering boost. To the right of the steering wheel, you'll find the dimmer, the button to open that EV charging port up front. This enables and disables the charge timer on the vehicle, turns on and off the heated steering wheel, and then deactivates the traction and stability control. Looking up at the ceiling in the Soul EV, we have a headliner that feels a little bit less premium than the gasoline version, but that's primarily because this is all bioplastic derived. Out on the road, the Soul EV is basically just a regular old Soul, but it is heavier, and it definitely feels like it behind the wheel. We get the same sort of steering feel that we get in the gasoline Soul, so it ranges from a little bit overboosted to not a whole lot of feeling, but definitely heavy steering. That's adjustable via that button on the steering wheel. What I mean about the vehicle feeling heavier is really obvious when you take a look at acceleration and braking. Acceleration comes in around 9 seconds. That's definitely slower than any of the other versions of the Soul. But I'm going to have to give this 8 out of 10 points for the EV segment. This is actually one of the swifter EVs that's out there. Definitely not as fast as the BMW i3 EV or as the Chevy Spark EV, because that Spark has an awful lot of oomph and it's a decent amount smaller, but the Soul is fairly quick. It is a little bit faster than the Nissan Leaf. I think that the Nissan Leaf is probably the truest competition for this, aside from the Volkswagen e-Golf. Braking distances are obviously longer than the gasoline Soul. That has to do with the weight as well as the narrow tires. If you take a look at the Soul Exclaim or the Soul Plus in gasoline form, those vehicles stop much faster because of the wider tires. They're not using low resistance tires like this is to try and improve economy. It's very obvious when it comes to braking. But the weight is also obvious in daily driving. This vehicle feels a little bit heavier out on the road. Potholes don't seem to disrupt the suspension quite as much as the Soul in gasoline form. It actually gives you a slightly better ride in the EV than you get in the gasoline form. So I'm going to have to give the ride 9 out of 10 points. Even though this is a fairly short wheelbase, the ride is still fairly well composed. When it comes to handling, the gasoline version of the Soul, especially in base form, doesn't compete that well in its segment because it doesn't handle quite as well as some of those other options out there. It's a little bit taller, it's a little bit boxier, it doesn't have quite as elegant of a rear suspension design as you find in something like a Ford Focus hatchback or a Ford Focus sedan, etc. But this EV is actually different because the EV is competing with all the other EVs out there, and those EVs in general have low rolling resistance tires, they have higher curb weights, they don't necessarily handle as well as their gasoline counterparts. But this vehicle in some ways handles better than the base version of the Soul. It definitely feels more planted. We get a lot less body roll, interestingly enough, than in the base Soul. And because of the way this battery pack distributes the weight, it actually has a slightly better weight balance that's really obvious in neutral handling out on these roads. You can tell that this vehicle doesn't plow quite as much in the corners as the regular Soul does. Obviously, this doesn't handle as well as the Soul Plus or the Soul Exclaim in gasoline-only form, but this actually handles quite well for an EV. This has been averaging between 3.9 and 4.3 miles per kilowatt hour. That means this is a little bit less efficient than some of those high efficiency options out there, but this is actually more efficient than something like a Mercedes-Benz B-Class electric or even a Tesla Model S. Cabin noise comes in at 8 out of 10 points. I registered 72 decibels at 50 miles an hour in this cabin, which is a little bit quieter than the last gasoline Soul I tested. That's of course due to these narrower tires, which are giving us a little bit less road noise, but also the fact that we don't have a gasoline engine under the hood making a lot of noise. The Soul EV is very quiet, especially at low speeds. The Soul EV is one of the few EVs out there that doesn't have quite as many compromises compared to its gasoline counterpart out on the road. Yes, this is heavier and that does affect braking as well as handling. It doesn't handle as well as the up-level versions of the Soul, but this really doesn't handle that much differently than the base version of the Soul in terms of absolute road grip. I think in terms of overall feel, it feels a little bit better than that base Soul, and it slots kind of right in the middle of the whole Soul pack. So the base version of the gasoline Soul isn't quite as nice as this, but the upper level versions of the gasoline do feel a little bit more connected out on the road. That range is important when it comes to selecting your EV. Obviously, this vehicle is not really a good fit for someone that actually has a 100-mile round-trip commute to work. But if you have, say, a 60-mile round-trip commute to work, this is the best EV for you. You don't really want to buy an EV that's barely at that range or barely over, because as the battery starts to wear, it won't really work for you long-term. If you have a 60-mile round-trip commute, this vehicle will work for you even if the battery loses about 20% of its capacity over its very long battery warranty. Battery warranty and battery capacity are very important considerations. Most manufacturers out there do have a battery capacity warranty. However, the vast majority of them do say that the battery should lose about 30% of its capacity over its lifetime. So you should never expect 100% capacity at 100,000 miles. Like other Kias out on the market, the Soul EV's pricing is very simple. There are really only two versions available. Base starts at $33,700, and the up-level trim, which is the Plus, starts at $35,700. There are essentially no options on either one of those trims. As with most EVs out on the market, this does qualify for federal and state credits and incentives. So if you live in California, you can get up to $10,000 back, dropping that base price to $23,700 and this up-level price to $25,700. As with all the other EVs out there, the Soul EV qualifies for federal and state incentives. You do need to keep in mind that your incentive may vary based on your tax situation, but if you qualify for the maximum, you can take $10,000 off of both trims of the Soul EV, dropping the base price to $23,700 and the Plus price to $25,700. Honestly, if you're going to buy the Soul EV, you should buy the Plus version we're taking a look at here, because you get an awful lot of standard equipment for only $2,000. We get the leather seats, cooled seats, we get the front and rear park assist, auto dim mirrors, heated front and rear seats, upgraded trim on the inside, as well as the power folding mirrors. One thing to keep in mind is that versus the gasoline Plus version of the Soul, we still don't get the upgraded Infinity surround sound system with the subwoofer we don't get power seats, and we don't get the HID headlamps up front. Now that said, the big takeaway with the EV version is that this is only $1,000 more expensive than the gasoline version if you qualify for the maximum tax incentives. And that is an incredibly small delta. That's much smaller than you find in most of the other EVs out there. So it's approximately $1,000 more than the Kia Soul gasoline. Why would you buy the EV? It's all about this number right here. Supposedly, according to the EPA, you'll save about $8,000 in fuel costs over 5 years with this versus your average new vehicle. The Soul EV turns out to be my favorite EV available right now. It doesn't really hurt that the Soul is already one of my favorite gasoline vehicles out there because it's incredibly practical and it has an awful lot of value packed inside. That's really what we're seeing in this version of the Soul. Kia really knows how to cut exactly the right corners and very few of the wrong corners. We don't get a fast charger up front like we do in some of those other vehicles out there. Again, as I said, this is stuck at 6.6 kilowatts. We get a faster charger in something like the i3, the Mercedes B-Class electric, or Volkswagen's own e-Golf. We also don't get fancy HID headlamps or LED headlamps up front. We just get regular old halogen high and low beams. However, on the inside, we get a heat pump, which is much more efficient for heating and cooling the cabin. We also have heated and cooled front seats in this top-end model, along with the heated steering wheel. It's much more efficient to cool the seats than to cool the entire cabin. That's a very unique feature we get in this that we don't find in most of the EVs out there, and it really makes a big difference in energy consumption, especially in mild summer weather. During my week with the Kia Soul, temperatures were ranging from 73 to 75, and I was able to drive this particular vehicle with the air conditioning off and the cooled seats on, and I wasn't able to do that in some of the other EVs out there. I did end up feeling a little bit too hot and had to turn on the air conditioning. In addition, our Plus model also has front and rear park assist sensors, which makes this an awful lot easier to park in tight, restricted urban situations. The overall size of the Soul also makes it very practical in those areas. You bundle that together with that large 8-inch touchscreen that is standard, as well as the Kia telematics system that is included in every version of the Soul EV, you can really see this does price out to be a very good deal compared to the competition. Obviously, you're going to pay more for this than you will a Nissan Leaf. The Nissan Leaf is definitely the cheapest EV available right now in the United States, but we get a lot less in that base Leaf than we get in the base version of the Soul EV. We only get a 3.3 kilowatt charger, which is about half the speed. We don't get a heat pump. It's a resistive heater on the inside. We get a smaller battery pack, lower range. We get a little bit more room in the back seat and a little bit more cargo room, but overall, it's just not as practical as this. I think in reality, Volkswagen's e-Golf is the best direct competitor to this. The e-Golf is very nice to drive, and I really liked its adjustable regenerative braking system. So it does have the ability to go from no regenerative braking to complete regenerative braking in 4 different steps. Ford's Focus EV is probably the best handling EV, so if you care about the optimum driving experience, then definitely get the Focus. However, in the back, we don't get quite the same storage capability that we get in this particular model. We don't have any fast charging ability in that Ford, and the back seat is definitely more cramped. The big deal with the Spark EV and the BMW i3 is that they're 4-seat vehicles only, and this is a 5-seat vehicle like the majority of the EVs in this segment. The Spark EV as well as the BMW i3 also use the new SAE combo connector for charging, and that's specifically DC fast charging. An important consideration is that even though those DC fast charge connectors are just as fast as far as charging goes, they're a lot less available. My bottom line with the Soul EV is that this is definitely the kind of car that I would buy. Personally, I would be torn between the gasoline version and the EV version, but what makes that decision harder still is that they're only about $1,000 apart. You do lose a few of the creature comforts in this that you get in the gasoline version. Again, the HID lamps, the power driver's seat, and power adjustable lumbar support, not to mention the up-level sound system. But the EV is very, very well equipped. It's also one of the most practical and most comfortable EVs out there. The range is probably the biggest thing with the Soul, however, because if you're looking at some of those vehicles in this category that only go 60 to 70 miles, this has a decent range bump versus those other vehicles. It makes it a lot easier to fit in the average American's lifestyle. Whether you're shopping at the low end or at the high end of the EV segment, I suggest you put the Soul EV on your shopping list. Versus those base models in this segment, it's not that much more, and we get an awful lot more feature content on the inside. We don't lose that much either when you take a look at the i3 electric or the Mercedes-Benz B-Class electric. The i3 doesn't have cooled seats. This does. We also get a few features on the inside that you don't get on those up-level models.